We have joining us here in the studio Mr. Bayo Adiola, who's a structural engineer, and Mr. Julius Akpong, who's a safety expert. He is joining us via Skype. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us on the News at 10. Thanks for being here. Well, looking at those pictures, I know as a structural engineer, you're thinking more about, the building itself. And of course, it's always better to prevent than to try to rescue. So why are those buildings collapsing in the first place? Bearing in mind that some of these buildings are not actually as old, as people will want to think, or as, they want us to think, but, these are structures that were put up recently, considering that the Lagos, as it was before, was properly planned, right?
Basically, when you look at the more recent collapse in the old Lagos, basically it's a challenge of redevelopment. Most of the buildings in old Lagos are 50, 60, 70 years old. And they were built at different times. They were mostly bungalows and one-story buildings. In the last 30, 40 years, due to the demand for accommodation, people have gone to rebuild them, making 3, 4 stories out of them. The streets are not wider. The infrastructure is not better. So basically, what we have done is to densify an area that was lightly developed before. Now, the whole process of reconstruction hasn't been properly done. So we end up with buildings collapsing. There is no building that doesn't have a lifespan. And for you to extend its lifespan, you have to renovate it, you have to inspect it, strengthen it, renovate it. That is not being properly done. So people are putting more and more into less and less space and creating greater and greater hazards in the place.
Yeah, and some are blaming building materials. They're saying the builders are cutting the owners of the structures short, by you use one portion of cement and you mix it with like 10 portions of sand, to put up structures and things like that. That seems to be a norm, mainly that's what people are complaining about. And they think that is why these buildings are collapsing. But you're saying it's the foundation itself, No,
it's more complex. It's more complex. Like I said to you, buildings were done 50, 60 years ago, 70 years ago, and they were one-story buildings, bungalows and one-story buildings. What we're having now is that people are trying to make 4-story buildings of them. Okay? To do a 4-story building, the roads are not wider, the infrastructure is not better, the construction is not better. What that area of Lagos needs is a redevelopment. The engineering of it is clear. The physical planning of it is the next, and the engineering of it is to design a building that's safe. But do you make the roads wider? How do you pass more people through the streets? How do you give them more electricity? How do you give them more water? How do you make it work?
Bearing in mind that there will be emergencies and you might need to bring in some of those emergency vehicles, you would need to be able to manage the environment. I guess that question is for you, Mr. Julius Akpong, the safety of it all. You see buildings collapsing, and then you notice that it's difficult even for rescue operators to get to the site of this building collapse because, they're trying to manage crowd. And then let's talk about the equipment that they're using. In the report there, one of the speakers there was talking about live duty equipment. I don't know if we actually do have that and if we use that for rescue operations in Nigeria.
Yeah. Thank you very much, and good evening. You're talking about the equipment.
Yeah.
First and foremost, the report there was apt. It's, as you can see demonstrated there, it's very, very, very dangerous to use the payloader to just crush out the debris like that. However, in certain quarters in Lagos, where I've been on some sites of collapse, they now have procured some equipment that even detect people's voices that are buried under the rubble. So what they do is to, first of all, identify where the sound is from, and then they have cutters, sharp cutters, which they use to cut out the concrete from those areas. So yeah, it's wrong to use that when you've not brought out all the people. But I can tell you authoritatively, I've been there at times when I've seen them use some of those equipment by the LASEMA response unit.
Yeah, but it's always a waste of time, isn't it? I mean, the amount of time it will take to go and bring the equipment, and then you have the ambulances standing by, waiting to take injured to hospital and so on. There's a lot of time wasted while we're trying to get, the right equipment down to the areas, because as Mr. Adiola said, the roads are narrow, you have people all over the streets, so it's even more difficult.
Yeah, I totally agree, and the problems are many. Most of the time when these things happen, people forget to use the emergency numbers, 767 and 112. That is the first issue. The second one is a lot of people don't even know these numbers. And then when emergencies happen, people don't seem to have the awareness that they should stay away from there and allow opportunities for those who have competencies in this area to access the scene. Like, let's use the case in point, the Tafaji issue. Everybody suddenly becomes a hero. Those who are making videos for social media are making videos. Those who, because their relatives are involved, so they are pushing through to the scene, are also there. You saw how everybody became a rescuer. And it was difficult for the authorized people to get through to the scene, because a lot of these persons who were forcing their way through couldn't just be asked to leave.
Right.
So the best thing for us to do is to have a police force. There's a unit of a police force that is supposed to handle this. The disaster management unit is called the DMU. Every police station should have a DMU, because they are supposed to be the first people to arrive there and cordon off the scene of that crime while waiting for the emergency rescuers, the competent emergency rescuers to arrive at the scene.
Mr. Julius. Mr. Julius, we could go on. I wish we could, but this is where we end the conversation. Thank you again for joining us on the News at 10. Safety expert Julius Akmong and structural engineer Bayo Adiola. Thank you again, gentlemen. Thank you for coming on the News at 10.